I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. A war hero returns to his home after a long tour of duty. He is celebrated by the community, and he is welcomed back with open arms by his loving wife. But by the next morning, he is dead, murdered, stabbed to death. And there's no mystery who the culprit is, because the wife confesses. In fact, not only does she confess, she drags his body out into the street so the community that called him a hero can see it for themselves. But he is not the only body. A woman, not known to the community, has been violently stabbed to death. Upon further investigation, she is found out to be the war hero's mistress. Crime of passion, right? Yes, but the wife's motive behind the double murder is different than what you might think. Because truth be told, she was having an affair too. The mistress was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. See, the wife waited patiently for years for her husband to return home, playing the loving wife, not letting him suspect anything was wrong, to look him right in the eyes and exact vengeance on him for a much darker reason than infidelity. Because while he was away at war, she discovered a horrible secret about him. Before he left to go overseas to fight for family and country, he murdered their young daughter. I know, what's this world coming to, right? Sign of the times. Well, not so fast. See, the war hero didn't fight in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or Vietnam, or Germany. This story goes back a little further, like the Trojan War. The story is from the first act of the Greek play, The Oresteia by Aeschylus. It's one of the oldest Greek tragedies, and it is considered one of the most important. In the Oresteia, death is a domino effect, where the body count stacks up as each member of the family kills another in the name of vengeance. It gets so bad that the gods intervene to sort out which murders are revenge and which are justice. But the Oresteia is not the only Greek tragedy that dealt with murderous and dysfunctional families. Oedipus murders his father to take the place of his father with his mother. Ugh. Medea stabs her children to death. In the Bacchae, one mother dismembers her son and carries his head around as a trophy. I can hear some of you say, that's the friggin' Greeks for you. But it's important to remember that one of the greatest crimes you could commit in ancient Greece was a crime against your family. The belief was that how you treated your family was how the gods were going to treat you. And the gods were already pretty damn cruel to humans. So you might ask yourself, if the family was so important, why did the Greeks make so many plays that showed families killing each other? Perhaps they were cautionary tales. Perhaps the family was a metaphor for the community at large. Perhaps the stories were there to acknowledge the anxiety we feel when we realize just how fragile the sanctity of the family really is. Blood is thicker than water. When all else fails, family will be there for you. Those are popular sayings about family. Perhaps the anxiety is from our fear that those sayings are not absolute truths. What drives some of us to harm those that are closest to us? Those of us that are bonded by blood. In an unsafe and dangerous world, why do some of us destroy the one safe place that we are supposed to count on? What is it that's inside of us, in our nature, that drives us to madness and cruelty and self-destruction? I think those are the questions the Greek tragedies like the Oresteia were trying to ask. And horror films have also tapped into our deepest fears about the threats to our families from a dangerous world. Today, I want to talk about the films that look at threats to the family that come from within, and how that threat sometimes hides in plain sight until it's too late. The first film I want to talk about, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, has the hopeless dread of a Greek tragedy, and for good reason. The Killing of a Sacred Deer takes its inspiration from two Greek plays based on the same characters and events, the aforementioned Oresteia and the play by Euripides Iphigenia at Aulis. In The Killing of a Sacred Deer, a successful cardiologist named Stephen befriends the teenage son of a patient who died on his operating table. Stephen and Martin meet at diners for lunch and they talk about their lives. Even though the conversations are overly polite, you sense there's a lot left unsaid between the two of them. Polite does not mean relaxed. Martin is a slouchy kid who looks like he'd be happy reading books all day. Physically, there's nothing intimidating about him. However, Martin is weirdly direct in conversation, and he has a slack poker face that makes his emotional state hard to read. Stephen, on the other hand, is charismatic and smart and commanding, like one would expect from a talented surgeon. Yet, when he is with Martin, he seems tense, and he's very cautious with his words. He buys Martin fatherly gifts like wristwatches, and we realize that Stephen does this out of regret, or maybe even guilt. And another thing, Stephen keeps these meetings a secret from his wife, Anna. He keeps this friendship with Martin a secret from his fellow surgeons and even discourages the boy from visiting him at the hospital. This is not normal, and we dread what the relationship might be. And even though your mind probably went to the worst place you think possible when a grown man and a teenage boy have a secret friendship, the relationship is worse than that. Things start to get tense when Martin requests to meet Stephen more frequently, and he starts making unannounced visits to Stephen's office. Now, Stephen is no longer in control of the arrangement, and this makes him very uncomfortable. And Martin starts to infer that his father may have died on the operating table because of carelessness on Stephen's part. Stephen denies any liability, saying a surgeon never kills a patient, only an anesthesiologist can kill a patient. What looked like politeness from Martin in the beginning now has a sinister, premeditated feel to it. Martin makes a passive-aggressive ultimatum. He wants to meet Stephen's family. He mentions that he goes to school with Stephen's daughter, Kim, and Martin wants to meet Stephen's wife, Anna, and his son, Bob, as well. See, he already feels very connected to them. Stephen finally tells Anna about Martin, but he says the relationship is a mentor-student one around medicine. So they agree to have Martin over for dinner. And that's when things take a surreal and sinister turn. Even though Martin is polite and gracious, Anna gets creepy vibes from his blunt questions about the family, and the dinner is uncomfortable. After Stephen completes this obligation of having Martin over for dinner, he distances himself from the boy. He doesn't show up for their regular lunch meetings, and he dodges Martin when the boy comes looking for him at the hospital. And then, one morning, Stephen's son Bob can't get out of bed. It's not that he's tired or sick. Bob can no longer move his legs. The boy is rushed to the hospital, and the doctors run a full neurological examination on him. The doctors find nothing physically wrong with Bob. They run a barrage of blood tests, and they find nothing. And yet, Bob is paralyzed from the waist down. And it is at this point that Martin meets again with Stephen and informs him that, yes, he is responsible for Bob's paralysis, and that this is just the first stage of a curse that Stephen has brought down upon his entire family when he killed Martin's father. Stephen himself will not be afflicted, but his fate may be even worse because Martin demands a death for a death. Now, even with that information, you still have no idea where the killing of a sacred deer is going to take you emotionally. This is a movie full of claustrophobic dread born on the realization that secrets can be as deadly as sins, and that the secrets of one person can destroy an entire family, especially if that person can't admit to themselves that they have done anything wrong. In the play The Oresteia, King Agamemnon secretly kills his daughter Iphigenia before he sails off for Troy. Allegedly, he does this as a sacrifice to the god Achilles to help him win the Trojan War, give a little bit of wind in the sails. Sounds harsh, but it's the kind of weird kingly thing you do in a Greek story. But see, the real reason he killed her was to cover up a fatal mistake he made that offended the gods. In the play Iphigenia, Agamemnon accidentally kills a sacred deer that belonged to the goddess Artemis, and she requires blood in return. That one secret, made to hide his terrible mistake, essentially brings the end to Agamemnon's entire family line, the House of Atreus. In the killing of a sacred deer, there are no gods or kings, just a negligent surgeon with an innocent family at the mercy of vengeance. The family doesn't deserve to be punished for the father's mistake. This is a cruel twist of fate that is not fair or just. But as Martin says in the film, it's the only thing I can think of that's close to justice. When it comes to family matters, justice is rarely fair. And that is the horror at the center of the killing of a sacred deer. In 2005, the Department of Justice released a landmark study on family violence. It showed that in the year 2002, there were 9,102 murders in the United States. 21.5% of the victims were killed by members of their own family. That's 1,958 people who didn't see it coming. They didn't think their loved one would ever go that far. They didn't think that things would ever get that bad. We, the bystanders, can't help but wonder how the family could have missed the warning signs that must have been right in front of them. But the horrible reality is that it's one thing to see the warning signs and another to believe what you see. Who wants to believe that someone so close to you, someone you trust, maybe even someone you gave birth to, would kill somebody? The horror of domestic violence is that it strikes at a belief system that is built on trust and faith and unity and love. We need to believe that there is inherent goodness in those we love, and that a family, your family, can give you unconditional love, and you give it back. When it comes to families, there is no immunity against the bad seed. Just look at Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel are the sons of Adam and Eve, the first family in the Bible. Cain is the first offspring of mankind. He is also the first murderer when he kills his younger brother. Now, we are told in the Bible that Adam and Eve are created perfect. Now, there's a lot of theological dispute on what the word perfect means in this context. But I think it's safe to say that if the scriptures went to the trouble of pointing out that fact, then Adam and Eve came off the assembly line with all their factory presets exactly where they were supposed to be. And yet, the first family of man self-destructs from within. And that's particularly interesting because the Bible had already established a bad guy before the murder even happens. The devil has already manipulated the parents. He could have easily put horrible ideas in Cain's head. But no. Cain kills his brother with premeditation and of his own free will. It happens, dare I say, organically. And Cain feels no remorse. That is, until God steps in and makes him feel remorse. The boy, who is born from two perfect parents, has no empathy. It begs the question, what were his factory presets? The utter randomness of evil and how insidiously it hides in plain sight and how it manipulates its victims into blaming themselves is at the dark heart of the next film. We need to talk about Kevin. The film is also an examination of how the bond between a mother and a child may not be a positive one. The story follows Eva Kachadorian as she tries to live an anonymous life after her son commits a horrible crime. She changes her hair, and she lives alone in a small house, and she tries to find menial employment. Why does she live in such isolation and anonymity? Because whenever people find out who she really is and what her son did, they do things like pour red paint all over her porch and her car. She doesn't protest or call the police even when a woman randomly walks up to her in broad daylight and punches her in the face. Because Eva believes she deserves to suffer the flames of hell. Because she gave birth to a monster. Does she deserve this life of hell? The movie lets us be the judge by flashing backwards and forwards through her life. We recognize early on that Eva was overwhelmed by motherhood. Eva thrived on order and detail and planning, which made her a successful author of travel books. But raising a baby trashed all of that, especially with a difficult child like Kevin. Eva can't seem to do anything right or form a connection with this baby. At one point, baby Kevin won't stop crying, and the more Eva tries to comfort the child, the louder the baby screams. She finally puts the kid in a stroller and parks it next to an active construction site to drown out the kid screaming. And that's kind of the relationship in a nutshell. Eva stays home to raise Kevin, and try as she might, she can't bond with him. Kevin is openly hostile to his mother, and he antagonizes her at every turn. When she tries to talk to him, he mocks her with an irritating nya 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 nya. Oof. He wears diapers past the normal age because he refuses to potty train, and Eva needs to change him. Kevin reduces her changing his diapers into an act of humiliating servitude. They are trapped in a house alone with each other, day after day, and Kevin treats Eva like she's the enemy. It doesn't help that when her husband Franklin comes home, Kevin showers him with love and attention. Franklin dismisses Eva's frustrations about Kevin as exaggeration. It's true that Eva can be overly analytical and emotionally distant. Ironically, that emotional distance is what Eva and Kevin have in common. What we have are two people who are more similar than they think. Both Kevin and Eva are very smart and very analytical, and both are willing to live in serious mental and physical pain to win control. They start a passive-aggressive war that slowly becomes more aggressive and far less passive. There's a telling moment when Kevin, still a child, pushes Eva past her breaking point and she physically hurts him. Eva is horrified and she begs Kevin for forgiveness. Now, weirdly, Kevin seems to respect what she did. He even covers for her with a doctor and then with Dad. But what he really has now is a new blackmail tool. Now, all he needs to do is rub his scar to shut her up. Kevin looks her in the eye and says, "It's the most honest thing you ever did." The only people that Kevin and Eva are completely honest with are each other. They both see each other clearly for what they really are. Kevin knows that his mother doesn't love him, even if she can't admit it to herself. And Eva knows that Kevin has always been evil. And as he gets older, she fears he's becoming dangerous. And we feel the building dread of the inevitable outcome of this story. This situation escalates beyond a family drama and hurtles into an abomination. What's so unsettling about we need to talk about Kevin is that the emotionless monster is protected by the emotions of others. Franklin only sees a sweet little boy who loves him, and that clouds his judgment, and he just wants everyone to get along, so he's reduced to a pawn. And Eva feels so much guilt over hating her son that it makes her doubt the truth she knows about him. And the more Kevin rejects Eva, the more she yearns to be loved by him. Eva holds out hope that Kevin will grow past his anger as he matures. See, real evil relies on the empathy of others to fill in the emotional blank spots that they have. Evil makes bystanders and victims project their own emotions onto the person who has none. To the Cains of this world, emotions are just tools or weapons. Kevin's weapon of choice is emotional abuse, until he graduates to other weapons. We can't get a good answer to the question, why? Because there's just a dark hole where a motive might be. As Kevin says, when he is asked the question, why did you do it? I used to think I knew. Now I'm not so sure. We need to talk about Kevin explored the monster who has no empathy, the monster that uses the compassion of its loved ones to hide in plain sight. On the other hand, this next film talks about a monster who has no empathy that goes undetected because the entire family has no empathy. They're all too broken themselves to even notice. The movie is My Friend Dahmer, and I initially didn't want to watch this film when it first came out. I didn't want to watch something that made light or glorified Jeffrey Dahmer, because there are people who see him as some kind of folk icon. What I did find when I finally watched the movie was a shockingly despairing look at dysfunction. The movie examines the dysfunctional family and how everyone in the family slowly gets as emotionally sick as the sickest person is. But the movie also hits on the dysfunction of schools and communities and institutions where cruelty is a commodity and empathy is a liability. In this world, the monster doesn't need to hide in plain sight. In this world, a descendant of Cain needs to act like an even bigger freak just to get noticed, because everyone around him is too self-absorbed to care. My Friend Dahmer is based on a graphic novel by artist John Backderf, known professionally as Derf. It's the true story of his sort of friendship in high school with Dahmer. I say sort of because Derf and his group of friends adopt Dahmer as a mascot more than they treat him like a real friend. And I give Derf credit as a storyteller because he's painfully honest about how callous and cruel he and his friends were as teenagers. See, Derf and his friends, they weren't jocks and they weren't the popular kids. They were the bored, smart kids everyone ignored, the misfits who made fun out of everyone else to compensate. Their idea of a good laugh is to prank a former prom queen by pretending they're writing an article about her in the school paper just to meet her and then ask her how it feels to know that the best years of her life have passed her by. They despise bullies, yet their pranks are merely meant to humiliate. Dahmer doesn't even make their radar until he starts to act weird. Well, weird enough to be interesting. Dahmer is weird. Dahmer himself is the awkward kid that sits alone on the school bus. He's also the kid that picks up roadkill and brings it home to dissolve the bodies in acid so he can look at the bones. Speaking of his home life, it is a nightmare. Dahmer lives with his younger brother and his father, who's a chemist, and his mother, who is mentally ill. Mom has just gotten out of her most recent stint from a mental hospital. You know it's a fucked up household when Jeffrey Dahmer isn't the family member you're most concerned about. This family perpetually walks on eggshells. Mom has volatile mood swings that come out of nowhere, and there's no telling what's going to set her off. During one dinner, Mom undercooks the chicken to where it's still red and bloody. When Dahmer's younger brother mentions it, and then Dad confirms what he says, she thinks the family is ganging up on her. She makes a declaration. New house rule, we eat our mistakes. And she refuses to remove the food from the table. Mom's behavior only gets more erratic, and Dad loses the bubble as he constantly tries to steer clear of disaster. As Mom gets worse, the family starts to go down with her. Dad starts to distance himself from his wife and his children. The younger brother becomes Mom's personal lapdog, doing everything he can to keep Mom from abandoning him. And Jeffrey becomes invisible. When a family starts to disintegrate, everyone becomes completely self-absorbed and defensive because everybody is a victim and everyone goes into self-preservation mode. And that's the situation Dahmer is in when he appears on Durf's radar. Dahmer mocks a teacher who singles him out to answer a question by answering, "I don't know," as if he has cerebral palsy. He gets laughs. He gets attention. Later, Dahmer spazzes out in a crowded hallway, throwing papers in the air, falling to the floor, pretending to have an epileptic fit. Most of the teens in the hallway, including Durf, laugh. None of them check to see if he's okay. The bell rings, and the teens scatter off to their classes, and they leave Dahmer laying on the floor there alone. After that, Durf and his friends create the Dahmer fan club in honor of their champion spazzer. They find him hilarious. They take him to different public places to freak people out. Negative attention is better than no attention at all. It's certainly more attention than he gets at home. Every time we see his home life, it is a horror show, and it keeps him from having friends over to hang out. At one point, Dahmer invites Durf over for dinner and to listen to records. It's a chance to bond outside of stupid tricks. While they wait for dinner to start, Durf is introduced to Dahmer's father. Mom walks in and she's introduced, and everything goes very well. Until she looks at Durf and says, "What did he tell your parents?" Durf has no idea what she's talking about. She starts to accuse him, and it slowly becomes apparent that she's arguing with someone else who isn't there. Her husband starts yelling at her, and Durf suddenly realizes he forgot that he has to go eat with his own parents, and he makes a quick exit. Soon after that, Dahmer's father makes a quick exit too, moving out and finding himself an apartment. Dad says that the divorce will be amicable. However, he leaves Dahmer and his brother in a haunted house with a crazy woman. The boys of the Dahmer fan club like him well enough, but the truth is, they have him around for entertainment when they get bored. He's not included in their conversations. In fact, they walk around and forget Dahmer is tagging along with them until he speaks up. At one point, one of the friends asks Durf, "Do you think the way we treat him is mean?" "Nah, we're only having fun," says Durf, and Dahmer would not put up with it if he wasn't enjoying himself. But Durf notices that Dahmer starts coming to school later and later, and he is almost always dead drunk. Durf's response to seeing his friend like that is to distance himself. He's heading off to college soon anyway. Now, you may have noticed that I talked more about the Dahmer family and John Backturf and his fan club than I did about Dahmer himself. That's because I don't think this movie is about Dahmer. We learn nothing new about Dahmer. He's interchangeable with any other misfit kid that ends up being a killer. Instead, we learn a lot about John Backturf. It's as if he was compelled to cleanse himself of a burden when he made that book. I don't believe anything from Dahmer's childhood, except for maybe inherited schizophrenia, made him someone who kills 17 men. I give no sympathy in that fashion. But I think that Backturf realizes that he missed the depth of Dahmer's emotional damage because of his own lack of empathy. He shows us that he had no compassion for other people's feelings and that he was too self-absorbed to care. He knows that he and his friends were a surrogate family for a kid whose biological family fell apart, and they treated him like dirt and tossed him away when they got bored. And part of Durf must know how much danger his arrogance put him in, how naive he was to assume he could play with people's feelings and never have it come back to haunt him. He knows what we know, that Dahmer wasn't hiding in plain sight. He was a walking open wound. He was becoming gangrenous and closer to the edge of reason right in front of everybody's eyes, but nobody cared to take it seriously or cared enough to notice. The knowledge after the fact that you dodged a bullet must keep you up at night. But you know what? He missed it. It's understandable. It's hard to recognize the mark of Cain on someone else when your head is so firmly up your own ass. I mentioned that Jeffrey Dahmer's mother was in and out of mental institutions and how her illness affected the behavior of every person in the household. Mental disorders like schizophrenia or depression can also be passed down through generations. Like cancer or heart disease, mental disorders can lay dormant for years and then silently start to materialize. Long before genetics and understanding that there were multiple types of mental disorders, Greek tragedies called it by one word: madness. Plays like Heracles, Orestes, and Hippolytus all deal with main characters who are normal at the start of the play, and then they are struck with madness. It drives them to kill their sons, or their sisters, or their husbands. What makes a good Greek citizen suddenly froth at the mouth and attack his children? Well, in Greek tragedies, the answer was simple. Madness was sent down from the gods. And the madness came with a command, and the madness would not leave the afflicted character until he carried out that command. Often, the command was, kill your family. See, I told you the Greek gods are cruel to humans. So the Greeks believed that a family fate could be sealed by madness sent from the gods. And today, studies show that 27% of family homicides are committed by family members with untreated severe mental illnesses. And that brings me to the last movie on my list, Hereditary. Early in the movie, a high school class is studying the Greek tragedy Heracles. He's one of the guys who has madness visited upon him by the gods, and he kills his family. The teacher poses a question to the class. Is it more tragic if a character causes their own downfall due to a fatal flaw, or is it worse if their downfall was fated all along and the characters have no control of their own fate? Are we all just pawns in this horrible, hopeless machine? The interesting thing about Hereditary is that it poses that question to the audience, and then it becomes a film that deals with both scenarios. Hereditary is about the traumas, both physical and emotional, that families suffer. The traumas that are inescapable. The trauma could be mental illness. It could be a tragic death. It could be ordained by the gods. And I think that's why Hereditary splits audiences. It is stressful, and it's intense, and emotionally draining, and frightening. It's so unsettling because it traffics in the anxiety we feel around family, when we realize just how fragile the sanctity of the family really is. It deals with grief, and horrible loss, and horrible guilt, mental illness. It deals with lack of forgiveness and the fear of no longer being loved. We are watching a family slowly fall apart and die. And the horror is that it's through no fault of their own. That's some heavy shit, and a little too real for some audiences. And yet, this is not some hyper-realistic drama. The supernatural drenches just about every frame of this film. There are specters in the corners and disembodied voices and strange lights and portents of doom and strange symbols scratched into walls. It is a strange mix of the supernatural and the human tragedy laid bare. I think it's a masterpiece. The story starts with an obituary for Ellen Taper Lee, 78, who passed away after a prolonged illness at her daughter Annie's house. Annie is married to her husband Stephen, and they have 2 children, Peter, a teenage boy, and Charlie, a 13-year-old girl. Annie gives the eulogy at her mother's funeral, and we find out that the two had a very difficult relationship. Annie's mother was secretive and had a whole part of her life she kept away from her family, and she suffered from dementia towards the end. Body language at the funeral tells it all. Annie's family is indifferent to the point of boredom about being at the funeral. In contrast, the viewing is packed with mourners from her mother's other life who smile broadly and they touch her body with so much affection. When we see Annie's family back at home, we realize there's an unspoken tension in this house. We can't tell if the tension is residue from grandmother or if this is caused by something else within the family. But it is obvious that everybody isolates. Annie is an artist who creates dioramas based on her life, and she spends a lot of her time alone, recreating moments from her past in great detail. Of course, her mother is on display in the dioramas, and even in miniature, Mother is intimidating in her posture. Peter spends most of his time in his room playing guitar or smoking pot. He's a non-confrontational kid, agreeing with everything just so the conversations end quicker. Charlie, on the other hand, is a strange, disheveled, and haunted child who hides out in the backyard treehouse, making figurines out of discarded junk and animal parts. She daydreams and is consistently distracted and wanders away as if she's following voices only she hears. Stephen, the father, is in perpetual father maintenance mode. He patrols every room and checks in with every family member and keeps everyone on time and presentable. And then, that night after the funeral, right before bed, Annie swears she sees her mother in the dark corner of a room. When she turns on the light, there's nothing there. When she turns the light back off, her mother is back. She tells Stephen this, and we expect him to tell her, it's nothing. But he looks at her with deep concern. Later, Annie sneaks out of the house and she drives to a grief counseling support group. At first, Annie doesn't want to speak, but finally, she opens up. When she does, what we hear changes the tone of the movie for keeps. Annie's family has a history of mental illness. Her father had psychotic depression, and he stopped eating and died of starvation, slowly and horribly in the house. Her brother suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and he claimed that his mother had tried to put people inside of him right before he committed suicide. We also find out that Mom suffered from dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities, and that she would breastfeed Charlie as if she were her child. Oh, and Annie reveals that she herself used to sleepwalk, and one time she woke up standing in front of her screaming children, doused in paint thinner and striking a match. Stephen still doesn't forgive me, she scoffs. We realize that the family is worried that the death of Annie's mother is going to adversely affect her. Well, that turns out to be the least of their worries. And that's all I'm going to give you, because this is a movie you need to allow to surprise you, and allow to upset you, and allow to scare you. I will say this. I believe Hereditary is a prime example of why I think horror is such a beautiful and important art form. Because horror allows us to examine uncomfortable and divisive subjects in the abstract, where demons and angry gods replace things that are way too horrible to contemplate head on, like the death of a family member, or the impact of a family member with mental illness, and how they leave a pain that never goes away. Maybe that's why the Greek tragedies endure as they do. They are parables for those moments when there is no answer to the question why. And I believe so are these horror films. Oh no, he's singing for his supper, folks. I've had several people contact me about financially supporting the show, and I want to say that Hellbent for Horror is a listener-funded show. I don't sell advertising. I don't waste your listening time with ads. Now, with that said, the show does need your help to keep it going in the way that it has been. If you like the show and you think you're getting value from the show, there are several ways that you can help out. You can tell others about the show. You can write reviews on iTunes, and you can support the show financially by several methods. If you want to use a credit card or debit card, you can contribute an amount per episode using Patreon. You can also contribute using PayPal. Now, both Patreon and PayPal will take a percentage of your payment. Now, I know some of you don't like to use PayPal or Patreon, so H4H is listed on Zelle. Zelle is a digital transfer service that is an option on most U.S. bank accounts, so you can find me on Zelle by my email address, scott@hellbentforhorror.com, and just list a dollar value you feel is fair. You can also make that a recurring payment by clicking on a button when you fill out the information. If you're not into the whole digital payment thing, H4H has a P.O. box, and you can send checks or money orders or chickens or wax lips or weird mail to this address. Hellbent for Horror, PMB 800, 1250 Fairmont Drive, Suite A, San Leandro, California. And if there's a way you wish to support that I haven't listed here, just contact me, and I'll get that service up and running for the podcast. All these payment options are on my website, hellbentforhorror.com. So it's easy to support the podcast and keep it going. Let's go to the listener mailbag. This episode's listener email is from Ava Brillat. I hope I said that right. My first kiss was a censored version of Silence of the Lambs that I watched when I was 9, growing up in Saudi Arabia. I think my parents initially thought it would be okay for me to watch because it was censored, but they quickly realized that it wasn't age appropriate. They tried to hustle me away, but I snuck out of my room and watched the rest of it from the stairwell, leading to months of nightmares. I think the censorship actually made it worse by increasing the mystery. Some parts cut sharply and abruptly to the horrified reaction of the actors to scenes which I couldn't see, making my imagination run overtime. I was filled with such overwhelming dread at implied horror, and it scared me to the core. Needless to say, I was hooked. I still have a special place in my heart for serial killers, and Silence of the Lambs remains one of my favorites. Thank you so much, Ava, for sharing that first kiss. And now we are on to the pick of the episode. Keeping with the theme of self-destructing families, I bring you this movie, Stillborn, 2017. The movie starts with Mary about to give birth to twins as her husband Jack holds her hand and talks to her. We don't hear what he says. We only see the images in this scene, set to dramatic music. Mary pushes, and we see the happy reaction of the doctor, who looks up to reassure Mary, and Mary and Jack are elated and sobbing with joy. Mary pushes again, but this time the doctor freezes in place. The nurse next to him leans in for a closer look. We see Mary and Jack, and they see the reactions, and they stop and stare, and we cut to black. That first scene is a great indication of the style and the theme of this film. The movie only gives you a portion of the information at any given time, and it lets you make decisions on intuition and expectations, which is a lot like what the main character experiences. Mary and Jack were aware they were going to have twin boys, Thomas and Adam, but they lost Thomas as a stillbirth. We know he was named Thomas because the baby room at their home still has both cribs in it, with the names written on the wall above each crib. Can it get sadder? They can't bring themselves to take down the crib yet. It hurts too much. Mary is suffering from postpartum depression, but she's hiding it from Jack. They've moved to a new neighborhood. Jack needs to work extra hours to support a baby, so there's a lot of extra stress. Add to that, Mary can't get Adam to breastfeed, and he seems to respond more to Jack than her. One night, she's listening to Adam over the baby monitor, and he starts crying. As she's getting ready to head upstairs, he wails in extreme pain. The baby is in agony. She vaults up the stairs, and when she gets to the door, she hears 2 babies crying behind that door. When she opens the door, she still hears 2 babies crying, and the voices are coming from both cribs. But when she looks in Thomas's crib, it is empty. Later, while she's watching the baby cam, she sees a woman run into the room and grab Adam out of the crib. She runs through the house in a panic, trying to find this woman, but only finds Adam lying safely on the couch. Did she leave him there and forget? This is the start of a horror film that can go either in the direction of supernatural or psychological, and it smartly refuses to telegraph which might be the right answer to the movie. The sequences where Mary may or may not be experiencing a supernatural or a human home invasion are very well done and very tense. The only issue with that illusion holding so well for so long is that eventually the director, Brandon Christensen, needs to choose one way or the other. And whichever one he picks, you're bound to feel disappointed because the mystery is the lifeblood of Stillborn. Still, although it's not perfect, I liked the movie a lot, and I appreciated its dedication to the slow burn scare. I give it 3.5 bloody pacifiers. Are you ready to scream with pleasure? I have an exciting announcement about my book, Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, published by Cold Cracker Press, and it's going to be available on Amazon and all those great places November 26th, 2018, right before Cyber Monday. And it's going to be available pre-sale on October 1st. Now, thanks so much for your interest in my upcoming book. If you're interested in, say, getting a little bit more information about the book, how about a free chapter of the book? Sign up for an exclusive sneak peek of the book by going to hellbentforhorror.com/book. Sign up onto our newsletter, and in that newsletter, believe me, I don't want to send out a whole bunch of stuff. I'm not going to annoy you. I'm going to give you some wonderful little treats of things that didn't make it into the book, stuff like that to keep you excited about the book, because I'm excited about the book. Screaming for Pleasure isn't just about blood and guts. It's also about love and death and sex and politics and the terror of daily modern living, just like the horror genre itself. Listen, I wrote this book for movie lovers, even the ones who can't remember the last horror movie that they watched. This is for folks who stay up all night talking about their favorite movies and why they love them so much. If you're that kind of movie lover, this book is for you. I dig into why the things we find scary in movies are scary in the first place, and also how that can change from generation to generation. I believe that art has the power to change people's lives, and I believe that horror is a beautiful art form. My hope is that after you read Screaming for Pleasure, you'll have a deeper appreciation of the diversity, the inventiveness, and yes, even the beauty of the horror genre. That's my book, Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, published by Cold Cracker Press, coming out November 26th. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.